I thought it was going to be a quiet weekend at my lake cabin, just me, the sound of water against the dock, and a few hours away from all the HOA drama. But peace doesn't last long when your neighborhood has a self-proclaimed HOA enforcer. Out of nowhere, Karen, yes, that Karen, stormed onto my property without knocking, without calling, and without a shred of hesitation. She had that wild, determined look in her eyes, the kind you only see when someone thinks they're untouchable. But what she didn't know was that inside my cabin, sitting at my kitchen table, was someone she absolutely did not want to mess with, the state attorney general himself. Karen didn't just knock, she exploded through the door like a hurricane with a mission. The wooden frame rattled as she barged into my lake cabin, waving a thick stack of HOA violation notices like a sheriff serving warrants. Her voice hit me like a siren, loud and shrill, every word dripping with authority she thought she had. "You can't just do whatever you want here," she barked, marching straight across the living room without so much as a hello. "This lakefront property is under HOA jurisdiction, and you're in violation of multiple rules." She slammed the papers onto the table, scattering a few across the floor. I glanced up slowly from my coffee, forcing myself to stay calm, but my pulse was hammering. I could see her eyes scanning the dock through the window, narrowing at the sight of my small fishing boat tied up neatly. "Unapproved watercraft," she snapped, her finger stabbing toward the glass. "That dock lighting? Against regulations. And don't even get me started on the fire pit, open flames are strictly prohibited." I let her rant, watching as she unleashed her fury, oblivious to the fact that she wasn't just dealing with me today. Seated calmly at the kitchen table, his suit jacket folded neatly over the chair, was the state attorney general himself. A man with more power than Karen could ever imagine. He'd come to discuss a separate issue about illegal HOA fee hikes in our area, but Karen, well, she had no idea who she had just stormed in on. The Attorney General looked at me over the rim of his mug, clearly entertained, his lips curling into the faintest smirk. Karen still hadn't noticed him. She was too deep into her tirade, pacing the floor like a prosecutor in her own courtroom. "This isn't a free-for-all," she declared dramatically. "You signed the bylaws when you bought this property, and the HOA will not tolerate violations." The silence that followed her final outburst was thick, almost suffocating. I leaned back in my chair, meeting the Attorney General's amused gaze. I could have stopped her. I could have warned her. But part of me wanted to see what happened when she finally realized just who she had stormed in on. Karen finally paused to catch her breath, her chest heaving as she stood there like a general who'd just conquered enemy territory. But then, something shifted. She noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. Her gaze slowly turned toward the kitchen table, and froze. The man she'd completely overlooked, the calm, composed figure sipping coffee like he had all the time in the world, was now watching her intently. His posture was relaxed, but his presence carried a quiet authority that made the air in the room feel heavier. Karen frowned, her confident energy faltering. "Anne, who are you?" she asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. He set his mug down carefully, almost deliberately, and looked her straight in the eye. "I'm Daniel Hartman," he said evenly, his voice calm yet firm. "State Attorney General." The color drained from Karen's face like water spilling from a cracked glass. She blinked once, twice, as if her mind couldn't process what she had just heard. "The Attorney General," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Yes," Hartman replied, leaning back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And I was just here reviewing some very interesting complaints about your HOA's conduct." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she was silent. The stack of violation notices slipped slightly in her trembling hands. You could almost hear her pride crashing down around her. I watched her glance toward the papers she'd thrown onto my table, and I could see the panic starting to set in. She had stormed in here ready to intimidate me, ready to make an example out of me, but now, she had stumbled right into the lion's den. Hartman folded his hands on the table, his gaze steady and unrelenting. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should discuss the HOA's enforcement tactics, since you seem so passionate about them." Karen swallowed hard, her bravado crumbling by the second. The silence stretched, thick with tension. You could almost hear the clock ticking on the wall. And for the first time, Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA queen, looked like she might actually run out the door she had so confidently barged through. The silence didn't last long. Karen, still clinging desperately to whatever authority she thought she had left, straightened her posture and tried to recover. I was just doing my job," she stammered, forcing a weak smile. "You know, making sure everyone follows the HOA rules." The Attorney General's expression hardened. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "Interesting," he said slowly. "Because the complaints I've received suggest this HOA isn't enforcing rules equally. In fact, I have evidence that certain board members, including you, Ms. Keller, have been selectively targeting homeowners while ignoring violations committed by friends and allies." Karen's face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but Hartman raised a hand to stop her. "Not only that," he continued, his tone sharp and precise, "there are allegations of misappropriated funds, falsified violation notices, and illegal fines. Do you know what we call that, Ms. Keller?" He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "Fraud." I sat back, stunned. I'd suspected the HOA was crooked for months, but hearing it laid out like this sent a chill down my spine. Karen's confident facade completely shattered. Her hands trembled as she set the stack of papers back on the table. I didn't know about any of that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Hartman wasn't letting her off the hook so easily. "We have statements," he said firmly, sliding a thin manila folder across the table. "Homeowners alleging harassment. Inflated fines. Unauthorized property inspections." He fixed her with a piercing stare. "And you've signed several of these notices personally." Karen's breathing quickened, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. The woman who once terrorized neighbors with endless citations and unannounced inspections was now cornered, exposed, and out of excuses. I stayed silent, watching the entire exchange unfold like a courtroom drama in my own living room. The storm outside had grown louder, rain pelting the windows, as if nature itself wanted to underscore the chaos happening inside. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one holding the power. The tables had turned, and this time, there would be consequences. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen stood frozen, clutching her violation papers like a lifeline, but her voice was gone. The Attorney General didn't waste any time. He opened the folder and calmly slid a few documents toward her. "These," he said, tapping the papers, "are sworn statements from homeowners who've been targeted, harassed, and overcharged by your HOA. Some of these fines weren't just excessive, they were illegal." Karen shook her head frantically. No, I was just following orders," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Hartman's tone stayed cold and steady. "You signed the orders, Ms. Keller. And based on what I've seen, you've overstepped your authority more than once." Her shoulders slumped as the weight of reality finally settled in. The self-proclaimed HOA enforcer, who once ruled over the neighborhood with intimidation and threats, was now standing in front of the highest legal authority in the state, and she had nowhere to run. Hartman turned to me briefly. "We're opening a formal investigation," he said. "From this point forward, any violations issued by this HOA are suspended until further notice." Relief washed over me instantly. Months of harassment, endless letters, and bogus fines, finally, it was coming to an end. Karen tried to salvage what little dignity she had left, mumbling something about misunderstandings and procedures, but Hartman cut her off sharply. "I suggest you speak to your attorney, Ms. Keller," he said firmly, "because this HOA's practices are about to face serious legal scrutiny." Without another word, Karen turned and walked out of the cabin, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. The door closed behind her, leaving behind an almost eerie silence. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I glanced at Hartman, who calmly gathered his documents and slipped them back into his briefcase. "Keep your dock lights," he said with a small grin. "You're well within your rights." And just like that, everything changed. If you've ever had an HOA nightmare or faced someone like Karen, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Case Files for more shocking real-life stories where homeowners fight back and win.